Hi guys, this is Minerva from Matt Bean Immigration and welcome back to our channel and thank you for tuning in. If you're new to this channel, we welcome you and hope you will join in for this or any other immigration tips. Please be reminded that any information that we share on this channel is for information purposes only and should not be used as legal advice, as each person's background is different. For this or any other immigration advice, please feel free to book a consultation with us. So today we'll be discussing what is Flagpole, and what do you expect at a flagpole inside Canada, and to how to actually do a flagpole inside Canada. All right, so guys, please be reminded, please feel free to like, share, comment, and hit your notification bell so that you can be notified when new content is being released. All right, so stay tuned to the end where we explain what flagpole inside Canada means. All right, so flagpole, that's a common term that is being used in the immigration atmosphere quite often, and people, I have a lot of clients when I say to them, okay, you are now approved, you may go ahead and flagpole to get your actual immigration document. I usually have to explain to them what flagpole is, because if you are not in the immigration atmosphere, it may be a term that you are not familiar with, right? So flagpole by definition is exiting Canada and returning to gain an immigration status, right? These are usually done at the Canadian borders, right, between the US and Canada, right? People may say, okay, what does that mean? How do I go about it? So technically, they are for people who are applying for a study permit or a work permit, mostly open work permits. But the Canadian border agencies, they are extending to other immigration policies right now, where they are, processing for other areas of immigration. But the most common ones are for study and work permits, right? So how do I go about doing a flagpole? So if you have applied inside Canada for a study permit or a work permit and you have been approved, instead of waiting for the IRCC to mail that particular document to you, then you can go to any one of the Canadian borders. The most common one in Ontario is at the Rainbow Bridge in Niagara Falls, right? So technically, why it is called a flagpole, it's actually going around the pole, exiting Canada, going around that pole and coming back inside Canada. So why people do flagpoles? Typically because this saves time, right? It's instead of waiting for IRCC, there are sometimes backlogs with IRCC in processing a study permit or work permit. You can actually go to the border to get it processed there, right? So usually when you get that letter of introduction, you can take that letter of introduction, or some people refer it as your point of entry letter. You know, that after you've been approved, for instance, a study permit, you know, they will send, IRCC will send that letter to you. Because technically, if you're outside of Canada, that's the letter you need to present to the border agency at the airport to get your study permit processed. So it's the same thing. Once you get that letter of introduction or your point of entry letter, you take that to the Canadian Border Agency at the Canada border between US and Canada, and then they will process your study permit same day. Now, the question I usually get, because I am exiting Canada and over onto the US side, do I need a US visa? So the answer is yes and no. So the Canadian border agencies, it is not a requirement to have a valid US visa, but bear in mind there may be some implications, because there are times that the US they will need to document this. Sometimes they give you a yellow paper. Immigration changes so often, but there's a particular document that they actually give to you to say they denied you entry into the US, but they're sending you back to Canada to be processed. And the US border agencies, they are familiar once you are there, because some people decide to drive over the border and come back in to be Flagpole, because you can either walk or you can either drive over the border, right? So when you drive over the border, what the US border agencies does is that they technically deny you entry into the country and then send you back to Canada to be processed, right? The implication is that I usually recommend that you have a US visa in order to Flagpole. Reason being is that a lot of people, they forget that they went to the US, they were exited from Canada, actually entered the US and was denied entry into the US. And when they're making their US visa application, none of that was mentioned, and that can actually have a negative effect on the decision for your US visa. So always bear in mind, if you do not have a valid US visa and you're going to Flagpole, while it is perfectly legal, when you are, or if you are going to apply for a US visa, you need to declare that you tried to enter the US based on the fact that you were flagpoling to gain your immigration status, whether as a student or a worker inside Canada, right? And bear in mind, you should have valid status in Canada at the time that you are going to Flagpole. If not, you may be faced with, when you exit Canada, US denies you entry, and then Canada denies you entry, and then you're faced with the implication of going back to your home country, right? So what that means is that if you're here as a visitor, make sure your visitor status is still valid. If you're here as a student and you were extending your student permit, ensure that your student permit is still valid, right? And if you're here as a worker and you're extending your working your work visa, if you are eligible to do so, ensure that you have valid status as a worker before deciding to go to Flagpole. All right, so the main reason for flagpoling, again, is to save time with the immigration officer. So another example is that you're here as a student and your spouse came as a visitor, and you now like to apply for an open spousal work permit for that spouse. So yes, what you would do is to go ahead and flagpole instead of putting in an online application, which may take weeks to get a decision, right? You can go to the Canada Border Agency at the nearest Canada-US border to you. Again, in Ontario, the closest one, or the most popular one, not the closest, but the most popular one that most people use is the Rainbow Bridge in Niagara Falls, right? So you'll take your spouse with you, and if you have children and they need to have status beyond their visitor 6 months visitor visa, you also take your children and your spouse to Flagpole, which again, you're exiting Canada and being re-entered to gain your status. And the work permit and the visitor records for your children would be processed the same day. So that's the main thing. When you flagpole, you get the physical document of your study permit or your work permit or your visitor record on the same day that you go and ask to apply. Now, some of the issues are what to expect when you flagpole. I usually tell my clients, try to be there as early as possible. If possible, and you're not in that area, try and have a sleepover and go to that flagpole area as early as possible. You may find that people spend the whole day to flagpole, while others are turned away by border agencies to say that, listen, we have enough people for the day and we cannot process anymore. And bear in mind, there are days, this is something I just learned recently from one of my clients, there are particular days that they do flagpoling. I know for Niagara Falls, it's done Tuesday to Thursday. Monday and Friday is out of it, right? So you have to be aware of the days that they actually do flagpole. So wherever you are, whichever province you are, and you decide that you want to go to the nearest border agency to flagpole, make sure you do your research and know what days they are flagpoling. And for the most popular areas, make sure that you are there early. There are people lining up there as early as 4:30 a.m. to get processed. So I have had clients that were there, they went probably 9, 11 o'clock, and they were turned away by border agencies to say, listen, we have enough people for the day to be processed and we cannot accommodate anybody else. So bear that in mind. Don't take it lightly. If you are going to decide to flagpole, make sure you check to know the days, and make sure that you are there very early so that you are not faced with the fact of going there and then having being told that you cannot do the flagpole today, or that you came too late. They are not accepting anybody else for the day. All right. So those are some tips on flagpoling, what flagpoling actually is, and what to expect when you actually go to the flagpole. So what are the documents to take when you are going to flagpole? Of course, your passport is a must. And that letter, your approval letter and that introduction letter is what you are going to take to process, for instance, your study permit or perhaps even a work permit. But say you're going to apply for your spouse's work permit or your children's visitor record, just ensure that you have particular documents available, such as your study permit, because remember, your spouse's work permit will be tied to your study or work permit, right? So make sure you have a copy of that immigration document, a copy of their passport, maybe if you want to travel with a bank statement to proof of funds, things like that. Just make sure, just treat it as if you're putting in the application online for that particular immigration document, and take those documents along with you when you are going to process or apply for either your extension of study permit, work permit, an initial open work permit, or an initial visitor record for your children. All right. So I hope these tips were useful to you. Again, if you did like this information, please like, share, comment, and hit that notification button to ensure that this content or any other content, when released, you are being notified. And again, for any immigration advice, whether this or any other immigration advice, please reach out to us at macbeanimmigration@gmail.com or WhatsApp us at 416-991-8131. Have a blessed day and see you in the next video.